If there are more discouraging ways to start a Tuesday morning than sorting through bills while Nero Wolfe communes with his orchids upstairs, I haven't discovered them. The October air carried that crisp promise of autumn that makes you think about wool sweaters and apple cider, but I was stuck in the office on West 35th Street, wrestling with an electric bill that suggested we'd been powering half of Manhattan. The morning mail held the usual suspects, an invitation to invest in a revolutionary new security system we didn't need, a wine merchant's catalog featuring bottles that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and a padded envelope about the size of a paperback novel with no return address. In our line of work, anonymous packages get the same careful attention you'd give a sleeping rattlesnake. I set the envelope on Wolfe's desk and opened it with the letter opener, working slowly and keeping my fingers clear of anything that might bite back. Inside was a small velvet case, the deep blue kind that jewelers use when they want you to feel the weight of your wallet getting lighter. The case opened with a soft click that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet office. It didn't contain jewelry. Nestled in the blue silk lining was a silver spoon, not the everyday variety, but something with obvious breeding. The handle was elegantly flared, engraved with what looked like initials that could have been CM or MC, depending on your perspective. The bowl was shallow and wide, designed for something more delicate than stirring coffee. Along the inside curve of the bowl, a faint residue caught the morning light, dull where the rest of the silver gleamed. Beneath the spoon lay a card, expensive stock without any identifying marks. 3 lines of precise handwriting read, "The murder is hidden in the spoon. If you won't help, send it to the police. CM." At 11 o'clock sharp, the elevator descended from the plant rooms with its familiar mechanical sigh. Nero Wolfe emerged, carrying with him the faint scent of orchid bark and the satisfied air of a man who had spent 2 hours in the only company he truly enjoyed. He wore a yellow shirt that somehow managed to look dignified despite covering his considerable bulk, and brown trousers that had been tailored by someone who understood the engineering challenges involved. He settled into his custom-made chair behind the desk, like a mountain finding its proper place in the landscape. His dark eyes swept the office, noting the opened mail, the velvet case, and my expectant expression. "Good morning, Archie. I trust the morning's correspondence contains nothing that requires immediate attention." "Define immediate," I said, sliding the velvet case across his desk. "We've received what you might call a consultation request, anonymous, cryptic, and potentially lucrative." Wolfe opened the case with 2 fingers, examining the spoon with the same careful attention he gave to a particularly interesting orchid specimen. He read the accompanying card twice, then leaned back in his chair, the springs creaking under his weight. He said, which in Wolfe's vocabulary could mean anything from mild interest to profound contemplation. "I could call Inspector Kramer," I offered. "Let the police worry about mysterious spoons and anonymous accusations." "You could," he agreed, still studying the silver implement. "But first, perhaps you should call Fritz." I used the house phone to summon Fritz Brenner from his kitchen domain. He appeared promptly, wiping his hands on a spotless white towel, his chef's instincts already alert to something unusual. When he saw the spoon, his expression shifted to one of professional interest. "A tasting spoon," he said immediately, "but not common. The bowl is wide, designed for broth or soup. See the subtle lip? It would not clatter against porcelain." He leaned closer but kept his hands carefully away from the silver. "The craftsmanship is excellent. European influence, but American manufacture, I would say." "The residue?" Wolfe asked. Fritz studied the faint film without touching it. "Not food, something else. Something that should not be in a spoon used for tasting." He straightened. "This spoon, it has been used for something other than its intended purpose." "Thank you, Fritz. That will be all for now." After Fritz departed, Wolfe continued to examine the spoon, turning it slowly in the morning light. "The Culinary Alliance," he said finally. They commissioned a set of silver tasting spoons last year for their major donors, each piece engraved with the recipient's initials. You know this how? Fritz showed me their bulletin. The spoons were crafted by Hartwell Silver in Connecticut, using a design that incorporated the Alliance's seal. He set the spoon back in its case. The Alliance holds their annual gala next week, the Golden Ladle Awards. Before I could ask how he knew about the gala, the doorbell rang. Through the one-way glass in the front door, I could see a woman in her early 30s, dressed in a charcoal suit that suggested both money and taste. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat chignon, and she carried herself with a kind of controlled urgency that usually meant trouble. I opened the door to find intelligent brown eyes and a mouth set in a line that could have been determination or barely controlled panic. "I'm Celia March," she said without preamble. "You received my package." "Come in, Miss March. Mr. Wolfe is expecting you." She stepped into the office without the usual tourist's survey of the bookshelves and orchid photographs. Her attention went directly to Wolfe, then to the velvet case on his desk. She took the red leather chair I indicated and sat with her back straight, hands folded in her lap. "I am Nero Wolfe," he said, making it sound like a judicial pronouncement. "This is Mr. Goodwin. You have sent us a spoon and an accusation of murder." "I have sent you a problem," she corrected. "Whether it involves murder is what I need you to determine." Wolfe opened a bottle of beer, poured it carefully to achieve the perfect foam head, and took a measured sip. "Proceed." "The Culinary Alliance held a private tasting event 3 nights ago, a preview for major donors before next week's gala. The featured chef was Marcus Beaumont from Le Bernardin, presenting a new autumn menu. Her voice was steady, but I caught the slight tension around her eyes. During the soup course, one of the guests, Arthur Pembroke, became violently ill. He was rushed to the hospital but died before morning. The cause of death? Officially, food poisoning, a tragic accident involving improperly prepared shellfish. She paused. Unofficially, I have questions. Wolfe set down his beer glass. What sort of questions? Arthur was allergic to shellfish. Severely allergic. He carried an EpiPen and never ate anything without checking the ingredients first. The soup that night was a butternut squash bisque, no seafood anywhere in the recipe. Yet the autopsy found traces of shellfish protein in his system. And the spoon? That spoon was on the serving table that night. Each donor has their own, with their initials engraved. Mine was used to serve Arthur's portion. She looked at the velvet case. After Arthur collapsed, there was confusion. People were calling ambulances, clearing the room. I noticed the serving spoons being collected, but mine wasn't cleaned with the others. It had that residue you see now. Wolfe studied her face with the intensity he usually reserved for a particularly complex orchid hybrid. You suspect someone deliberately contaminated your spoon with shellfish extract, knowing it would be used to serve Mr. Pembroke. I suspect someone wanted Arthur dead and found a way to make it look accidental. She opened her purse and withdrew an envelope. Arthur was about to expose some irregularities in the Alliance's finances. Money that should have gone to culinary scholarships was being diverted elsewhere. By whom? That's what I need you to find out. She placed the envelope on Wolfe's desk. My retainer, $25,000. Wolfe didn't open the envelope, but I could see him calculating. $25,000 would cover our expenses for several months, with enough left over for some of those expensive wine bottles he favored. The Alliance Board consists of how many members? He asked. 7. Arthur was the treasurer. The others are Vincent Hartwell, who owns the Silver Company, Dr. Elena Vasquez, a food critic, James Morrison, who runs several high-end restaurants, Patricia Kemp, a cookbook author, David Chen, a wine importer, and myself. And the staff. 3 full-time employees, Margaret Sims, the executive director, Robert Fielding, the program coordinator, and Sarah Walsh, who handles events and publicity. Wolfe finished his beer and set the glass down with a soft thump. "Miss March, you are asking me to investigate a death that the police have ruled accidental based on your suspicion that someone used your spoon as a murder weapon. I'm asking you to find the truth. If Arthur's death was accidental, I'll accept that. But if someone killed him to cover up financial crimes..." She stood. Arthur was a good man who cared about young chefs getting their chance. He deserved better than dying alone in a hospital room. Very well. Wolfe turned to me. "Archie, you will begin with the Alliance offices this afternoon. I want a complete list of everyone who had access to the serving area that evening, along with their movements during the dinner. You will also examine their financial records, particularly any transactions involving scholarship funds." "And the spoon?" I asked. "Will remain here in our safe until we determine what story it has to tell." He looked at Celia March. "We will find your truth, Miss March. Whether you will like it remains to be seen." After she left, I locked the spoon in the wall safe and returned to find Wolfe sitting motionless, his eyes closed. In the quiet of the office, I could hear the distant sounds of Fritz preparing lunch and the faint hum of the city beyond our windows. "You think she's right about the murder?" I asked. "I think," Wolfe said without opening his eyes, "that someone has committed what they believe to be a perfect crime, using the sanctity of a dinner table as their weapon. That, Archie, is an offense against both hospitality and justice." He opened his eyes and looked at me. "Bring your notebook this afternoon and wear the grey suit. You inspire more confidence in grey than in blue." I said I would, because arguing with Wolfe about wardrobe choices is like debating the weather with a hurricane. As I headed upstairs to change, I found myself thinking about silver spoons and hidden murders, about the delicate balance between appearance and reality that makes the difference between an accident and a crime. In a few hours, I would walk into the world of the Culinary Alliance, where reputations were built on the perfect balance of flavors and destroyed by the slightest misstep. Someone in that world had decided that Arthur Pembroke's time was up. Now it was our job to figure out who had the skill, the opportunity, and the cold-blooded nerve to turn a charity dinner into a murder scene. The afternoon promised to be interesting. By 2 o'clock, I was walking up Park Avenue in the grey suit, carrying Wolfe's authority like a badge, and my notebook like a weapon. The Culinary Alliance occupied the top 2 floors of a building that whispered money in the same tone that our brownstone murmured comfort. Both spoke of substance, but with entirely different vocabularies. The lobby was all polished marble and hushed efficiency, the kind of place where even the elevator music had been vetted by a committee. A receptionist with the professional smile of someone paid to like everyone directed me to the 4th floor, where Margaret Sims waited in an office that overlooked half of Manhattan. She was a handsome woman in her mid-40s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a way that suggested both practicality and style. Her navy suit was tailored to perfection, and her handshake carried the confidence of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in most rooms. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, settling behind a desk that could have doubled as a landing strip. "Celia mentioned you'd be coming. I have to say I'm puzzled by this renewed interest in Arthur's death. The medical examiner was quite clear. Food poisoning, tragic but accidental. Mr. Wolfe has a particular interest in accidents that involve people who ask inconvenient questions," I said, taking the chair she indicated. "Ms. March suggested Mr. Pembroke had concerns about the Alliance's finances." The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. "Arthur was our treasurer, Mr. Goodwin. If there were financial irregularities, he would have been the first to know about them, and the first to address them. Our books are audited annually, and they're impeccable." "I'm sure they are." Still, Miss March seemed to think he was about to expose something. "Celia is grieving," Margaret said, her tone suggesting that grief was a character flaw. She and Arthur were close. He mentored her when she joined the board. She's looking for villains where there are only tragic circumstances. I opened my notebook. more for effect than necessity. Tell me about Saturday night. The seating, the service, who had access to the food. She consulted a leather-bound planner. 24 guests, all major donors. Arthur was at table 3 with Vincent Hartwell, Dr. Elena Vasquez, and James Morrison. The menu was prepared by Chef Marcus Beaumont. 5 courses featuring seasonal ingredients. The soup course was butternut squash bisque, no seafood anywhere in the preparation. Who handled the service? Our events coordinator, Nero Wolfe, supervised the waitstaff. Robert Fielding, our program coordinator, managed the floor. The servers were from an agency we've used for years, all thoroughly vetted. A knock interrupted us, and a young woman with short blonde hair and nervous energy entered without waiting for permission. She had the kind of pale complexion that suggested too much coffee and not enough sleep. "Margaret, I need the final head count for—" She stopped when she saw me. "Oh, sorry. I didn't know you had someone." "Nero Wolfe, meet Archie Goodwin. He's asking questions about Arthur's death. Sarah coordinated Saturday's event." Sarah's face went white. "Questions? But I thought the police said it was food poisoning." "Just tying up loose ends," I said, standing to shake her hand. "You handled the serving arrangements?" "Yes, standard protocol. Each board member has their own silver serving spoon, engraved with their initials. We use them for formal events." Her hands were trembling slightly. "I set them out before the guests arrived and collected them afterward." "All of them?" The trembling got worse. "Well, no. Celia's spoon wasn't with the others when I collected them. I assumed she'd taken it home by mistake. It happens sometimes. I was going to call her about it, but then, with Arthur's death, I made a note that had nothing to do with missing spoons and everything to do with nervous hands. Who had access to the spoons during the evening? Just me initially, but during cocktails, several board members came back to chat with Chef Beaumont. It's normal. They like to play host. Including Ms. March? Sarah nodded quickly. She spent quite a bit of time back there, actually. She and the chef were discussing the soup recipe. She wanted to make sure there were no allergens that might affect Arthur. Margaret frowned. I wasn't aware of that conversation. "It was brief," Sarah said, the words tumbling out. "Just professional courtesy." After Sarah left to gather the information I'd requested, I made a detour past the program coordinator's office. Robert Fielding was an earnest-looking man in his 30s, surrounded by the controlled chaos of someone juggling too many projects. What caught my attention was a framed photograph on his desk, a younger Fielding beaming beside a distinguished older man I recognized as Arthur Pembroke. "Mr. Fielding, Archie Goodwin. I'm looking into Mr. Pembroke's death." His face clouded. Arthur was a good man, a real mentor to young people in the industry. His death is a tremendous loss. "You knew him well?" "He got me this job, actually. Recommended me to Margaret when the position opened up 3 years ago. Arthur believed in giving people chances." He touched the photograph gently. "He was going to announce a major expansion of our scholarship program at next week's gala. Double the funding, maybe more. That would require considerable resources. Arthur felt we were being too conservative with the endowment. He wanted to see the money actually helping people, not just sitting in investment accounts." I thanked him and headed back to collect the materials from Nero Wolfe. She handed me a manila folder with the guest list, floor plan, and financial statements, her hands still unsteady. "Mr. Goodwin," she said quietly. "Arthur was a kind man. If someone hurt him, they'll answer for it," I said. I was halfway back to the brownstone when my phone rang. It was Fritz, his voice tight with the kind of controlled alarm that meant visitors had arrived without invitation. "Archie, there are people here to see Mr. Wolfe. They say it's about the alliance matter. They seem determined. I'll be right there." I found 3 people in our office, arranged like a tribunal. Margaret Sims sat in the red leather chair with the composure of someone accustomed to getting her way. Beside her stood a lean man with prematurely grey hair and the calloused hands of a craftsman. Vincent Hartwell, I assumed. The third was obviously a lawyer, complete with briefcase and the kind of thin smile that suggested expensive hourly rates. Wolfe sat behind his desk, like a mountain that had decided to take up residence, a bottle of beer at his elbow and an expression of profound distaste on his face. "Ah, Archie," he said without looking up from the legal document he was examining. "Miss Sims and her colleagues have come to retrieve the spoon. They've brought counsel." The lawyer, a sharp-featured man named Orrin Dell according to his business card, leaned forward. "Mr. Wolfe, that spoon is property of the Culinary Alliance. Its removal from our custody was unauthorized." Was it? Wolfe set down the document and reached for his beer. "The spoon belongs to Ms. March, as Mr. Hartwell here can confirm, since his company manufactured it. She has every right to dispose of her property as she sees fit." Hartwell shifted uncomfortably. "The spoons were a gift to our donors, but they remain under Alliance stewardship during events. We should have been consulted." "You are being consulted," Wolfe said, pouring his beer with ceremonial precision. "Now." Dell opened his briefcase with a flourish. "I can obtain a court order demanding its return." "You can try," Wolfe said mildly. "You may call the police, the district attorney, or your barber. The spoon remains where it is until I am satisfied that its departure will not compromise my client's interests." Margaret Sims leaned forward, her composure showing its first crack. "Mr. Wolfe, we're not trying to obstruct justice. If there was foul play, we want it exposed, but unfounded accusations could destroy everything we've worked to build." "Then you should hope my investigation proves those accusations unfounded," Wolfe replied. "In the meantime, you will provide Mr. Goodwin with complete cooperation, a list of everyone who had access to the serving area Saturday night, including staff, caterers, and any board members who wandered into the kitchen. You will also provide the specifications for Mr. Hartwell's spoons, composition, finish, any treatments applied during manufacture." "We don't treat tasting spoons," Hartwell protested. "That would defeat their purpose." "Then you can say so in writing." After they left, Dell clutching his unused legal papers like a disappointed child with a broken toy, I settled into my chair and opened the folder Sarah Walsh had given me. "They came here to intimidate you into returning the spoon," I said. "That suggests they know it's important." "It suggests they fear what it might reveal," Wolfe corrected. "Ms. Sims arrived with counsel to reclaim an object that should incriminate no one, if her version of events is accurate. She did not bring condolences for the dead or concern for justice. That is instructive." I summarized my visit to the Alliance. Margaret Sims's defensive attitude about the finances, Sarah Walsh's nervous revelation about the missing spoon, Robert Fielding's obvious affection for Pembroke, and his mention of the planned scholarship expansion. "The spoon was used to serve Pembroke his soup," I concluded. Sarah Walsh admits Celia March had access to it, along with several other board members. But here's the interesting part. According to Fielding, Pembroke was planning to announce a major expansion of the scholarship program. Double the funding? Maybe more. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly. Which would require liquidating investments that someone preferred to keep intact. Exactly. And if Pembroke had discovered irregularities in how those investments were being managed, he would have become inconvenient. Wolfe opened his eyes. "Call Saul Panzer. I want him to examine the Alliance's financial records, not the sanitized versions they provide for audits, but the real transactions. Bank records, investment statements, any transfers that might not appear in their official books. And if he finds something, then we will know why Arthur Pembroke had to die," Wolfe said, reaching for his beer, "and why someone thought a silver spoon would be the perfect murder weapon." As I dialed Saul's number, I found myself thinking about nervous hands and missing spoons, about mentors and protégés, about the delicate balance between appearance and reality that makes the difference between justice and murder. Someone in the refined world of the Culinary Alliance had decided that Arthur Pembroke's inconvenient questions deserved a permanent answer. Now it was our job to prove it. The morning brought Saul Panzer's voice over the telephone, carrying the kind of news that makes a case crystallize from suspicion into certainty. I was finishing Fritz's exemplary coffee when Saul delivered his report with the methodical precision of a man who had spent the night following money trails through corporate mazes. Your Culinary Alliance has been playing some sophisticated games with their endowment, Archie. I've traced regular transfers to a shell corporation called Prospero Events. 38,000 here, 50,000 there, always just under the amounts that would trigger automatic audits. The company was formed 8 months ago with James Morrison's lawyer as registered agent. I made notes while Saul continued. The Alliance's public financial statements showed a healthy endowment growing through conservative investments. The reality involved money flowing through a network of accounts that would have impressed a seasoned embezzler. Who authorized the transfers? That's where it gets interesting. The endowment account requires dual signatures, executive director and treasurer, Margaret Sims and Arthur Pembroke. But here's the kicker. Pembroke's signature on the most recent transfers looks different from earlier ones. Either his handwriting changed dramatically, or someone else was signing his name. After Saul hung up, I carried the news to Wolfe, who was in the office reading a seed catalog with the concentration most men reserve for stock reports. He listened to Saul's findings without interruption, occasionally turning a page to examine photographs of exotic orchid varieties. Forgery, he said finally, closing the catalog. Mr. Pembroke discovered the deception and confronted his colleagues. Someone decided he had become inconvenient. The question is, who had access to forge his signature and the skill to make it convincing? Indeed, call Dr. Vasquez and arrange for her to visit this afternoon, then contact Chef Beaumont. Tell him I require his professional opinion on the technical aspects of Saturday's dinner service. The afternoon interviews began with Dr. Elena Vasquez, who arrived precisely at 2 o'clock with the punctuality of someone accustomed to restaurant deadlines. She was an elegant woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of sharp eyes that could detect a wilted garnish from across a crowded dining room. Her reputation as a food critic was built on an ability to discern subtleties that escaped lesser palates. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, settling into the red leather chair with practiced ease, "your appreciation for fine cuisine is legendary among those who understand such things. As is your ability to detect its absence," Wolfe replied. "Tell me about Saturday evening soup course." Chef Beaumont's butternut squash bisque was exceptional. Rich, complex, with subtle notes of nutmeg and a finish that suggested aged sherry. I made mental notes for a possible review. Her expression grew thoughtful. Though now that you mention it, there was something unusual about the service timing. In what way? Arthur's portion was delayed. The rest of our table was served normally, but his bowl came several minutes later. Sarah Walsh apologized, saying something about ensuring the temperature was perfect. At the time, I assumed it was typical kitchen coordination. Wolfe exchanged a glance with me. A service delay meant opportunity, precious minutes when someone could doctor a specific portion while maintaining the appearance of normal dinner protocol. "Did you observe Mr. Pembroke's behavior that evening?" Dr. Vasquez frowned slightly. He seemed agitated, which was unusual for Arthur. Normally, he was the picture of composure, but that night he appeared preoccupied, almost angry. He kept checking his phone and glancing toward the serving area. He also had what appeared to be an intense conversation with Celia March just before the soup course. The nature of their discussion? I couldn't hear the words, but the body language suggested disagreement. Celia seemed upset, and Arthur was trying to reassure her about something. It looked like a private matter, but clearly troubling to both of them. Chef Marcus Beaumont arrived at 3:30, still wearing kitchen whites that suggested he'd come directly from lunch service. He was younger than I'd expected, with the kind of intense focus that successful chefs develop as a survival mechanism. His handshake was firm, his attention immediate and complete. "Mr. Wolfe, this is an honor. Your reputation for appreciating fine cuisine precedes you." "As does yours for creating it," Wolfe replied. "Saturday's menu featured your interpretation of seasonal ingredients, I understand." Beaumont's face lit up with professional pride. 5 courses built around autumn flavors. The bisque was particularly challenging, achieving perfect balance between the squash's natural sweetness and the depth of flavor without overwhelming the primary ingredient. The preparation involved no seafood components? Absolutely none. I maintained strict allergen protocols, especially at charity events where dietary restrictions might not be fully documented. The bisque contained butternut squash, vegetable stock, cream, shallots, fresh thyme, and a splash of aged sherry. Nothing that could trigger an allergic reaction. Wolfe leaned forward slightly. Could shellfish protein be introduced after preparation without affecting taste or appearance? Beaumont considered the question with professional seriousness. Theoretically, yes. A concentrated shellfish extract could be dissolved into an individual portion without detection, especially given the bisque's complex flavor profile. The rich, creamy base would mask subtle additions. How concentrated would such an extract need to be? For someone with Arthur's severe allergy, a few drops of pure shellfish essence would be sufficient to trigger anaphylactic shock. The reaction would be rapid. Minutes, not hours. He paused, his expression darkening. "There's something else, Mr. Wolfe. During cocktails, I noticed a small jar on my prep station that didn't belong there, unlabeled, containing what looked like anchovy paste. I removed it immediately and gave it to Sarah Walsh, telling her that unidentified ingredients had no place in my kitchen." "Anchovy paste," Wolfe repeated thoughtfully. "Yes. While anchovies aren't technically shellfish, they're often processed in facilities that handle shellfish. Cross-contamination is common. For someone with Arthur's severe allergies, even trace amounts could be dangerous." After Beaumont left, I found Wolfe sitting motionless behind his desk, his eyes closed in the pose that usually preceded either profound insight or a request for beer. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the office. "So we have method and opportunity," I said. "Someone introduced shellfish extract, possibly from contaminated anchovy paste, into Pembroke's individual portion during the service delay. And motive," Wolfe added without opening his eyes. "Nearly $500,000 embezzled over 2 years through forged signatures and shell companies. Mr. Pembroke discovered the theft and was preparing to expose it, which narrows our suspect list to people with access to the serving area and knowledge of Pembroke's allergies. More specifically, to someone who could forge his signature convincingly enough to fool bank officials for months." Wolfe opened his eyes and reached for the beer opener. "Call Ms. Walsh. Tell her I require her presence immediately, and ask her to bring any papers or materials she removed from the Alliance offices." "You think she's our forger?" "I think she's terrified, which suggests either guilt or dangerous knowledge. Either way, she has information we need." 20 minutes later, Sarah Walsh arrived in a state of barely controlled panic. Her usual nervous energy had escalated to something approaching hysteria. She clutched a manila folder against her chest like a shield, her eyes darting around the office as if expecting attackers to emerge from behind the bookshelves. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, her voice trembling, "I don't know what to do. Someone broke into my apartment last night. They didn't take anything valuable, just searched through my work files." "What sort of files?" I asked, opening my notebook. "Event records. Financial documents I sometimes work on at home, correspondence with vendors." She opened the folder with shaking hands. They were looking for something specific, but I don't know what. Wolfe studied her with the intensity he usually reserved for orchid specimens. Ms. Walsh, you removed something from the serving area after Mr. Pembroke collapsed. What was it? She went white. How did you answer the question? The jar, she whispered. The anchovy paste jar that Chef Beaumont gave me. After Arthur collapsed and everyone was focused on helping him, I panicked. I thought if there was any connection between the jar and what happened to Arthur, it would look bad for the Alliance. So I took it. Where is it now? I threw it away. I was scared and not thinking clearly. Tears began streaming down her face. But I didn't kill Arthur, Mr. Wolfe. I would never hurt anyone. Yet you concealed evidence in a death investigation. I was protecting the Alliance. If word got out that there might have been contamination in our kitchen, it would destroy everything we've worked for. Wolfe set down his beer glass with deliberate precision. Miss Walsh, someone has been embezzling scholarship funds through forged signatures on financial documents. Are you aware of these irregularities? What do you mean? Transfers to shell companies, unauthorized withdrawals, signatures that don't match Mr. Pembroke's known handwriting. Someone with access to Alliance documents and the skill to forge convincing signatures. Sarah Walsh collapsed into the red leather chair as if her strings had been cut. Oh God, she whispered. Margaret said it was temporary. Just moving money around for better investment returns. She said Arthur had approved everything, but he hadn't. Not the recent transfers. Margaret showed me documents with his signature, but when I asked Arthur about them directly, he seemed confused. He said he'd look into it. She looked up at us with desperate eyes. That was 3 days before he died. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, the springs creaking under his weight. Ms. Walsh, you will remain available for further questioning. You will not contact Ms. Sims or anyone else at the Alliance, and you will provide Mr. Goodwin with samples of all signatures you've witnessed on Alliance documents. After she left, clutching her folder like a lifeline, I turned to Wolfe with raised eyebrows. So Margaret Sims is our embezzler, using Sarah Walsh to forge Pembroke's signature on financial documents. When Pembroke got suspicious and started asking questions, someone decided he needed to be silenced before he could expose the theft. Wolfe opened another beer and poured it with ceremonial care. But we still need to identify who had the knowledge and opportunity to commit the actual murder. Sarah Walsh had access to the anchovy paste and the serving area. She could have introduced the shellfish extract during the service delay. She could have. But consider her behavior, Archie. Genuine panic, not the calculated fear of a murderer facing exposure. She's a tool, not the hand that wielded it. Then who? Wolfe's smile was thin and cold. Someone who knew about Pembroke's allergies, had access to the serving area, understood the significance of the anchovy paste, and possessed the nerve to commit murder in a room full of witnesses. He took a measured sip of beer. Tomorrow, we will gather our suspects and see who reveals themselves under pressure. As I prepared my notes from the day's interviews, I found myself thinking about silver spoons and forged signatures, about the delicate balance between trust and betrayal that makes the difference between charity and murder. Someone in the refined world of the Culinary Alliance had turned a dinner table into a crime scene, using the tools of hospitality as weapons of death. Now we knew how and why. The question remaining was who had the cold-blooded calculation to serve death on a silver spoon. The answer, I suspected, would surprise us all. Thursday morning brought Vincent Hartwell to our door at precisely 9 o'clock, carrying himself with the rigid posture of a man who had built his reputation on precision and was watching it crumble around him. His silver hair was perfectly groomed, his suit immaculate, but his hands trembled slightly as he removed his hat, the kind of tremor that comes from sleepless nights and mounting pressure. "Mr. Wolfe," he said without preamble as I showed him to the red leather chair. I need to understand what's happening to my company's reputation. These spoons were crafted as instruments of appreciation, not weapons. Wolfe was already at his desk, having descended from the plant rooms with his usual punctuality. He studied Hartwell with the detached interest of a botanist examining a specimen that might be diseased. Your reputation, Mr. Hartwell, rests on the quality of your craftsmanship, not on the perversions others make of your work. Unless, of course, you had advanced knowledge of those perversions. Hartwell's composure cracked visibly. I manufacture tasting spoons, Mr. Wolfe. Beautiful, functional implements designed to enhance the appreciation of fine cuisine. Each one is sterling silver, 925 parts, pure silver to 75 parts copper for durability. The bowls are polished to a mirror finish, the handles engraved with individual initials using traditional burin techniques. Could foreign substances adhere to that polished surface? Certainly. Silver is chemically inert under normal circumstances, but the mirror finish would preserve microscopic traces of contamination. Proper analysis could identify specific compounds even in minute quantities. His eyes widened as understanding dawned. You're suggesting that Celia's spoon contains evidence of whatever killed Arthur. I'm suggesting that your beautiful, functional implement became a murder weapon, Mr. Hartwell. The question is whether anyone in your circle knew it at the time. After Hartwell departed, clutching his hat like a lifeline, I headed uptown to visit James Morrison at his flagship restaurant. The Gilded Fork occupied a corner building on Madison Avenue, all understated elegance and hushed efficiency. The kind of place where the waitstaff moved like dancers and the wine list required a second mortgage. Morrison received me in his office, a minimalist space that contrasted sharply with the traditional grandeur of his dining rooms. He was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 45, with the lean build of a man who understood that appearance was half the battle in his business. His smile was professionally warm, but his eyes held the calculating coldness of someone accustomed to measuring every interaction for profit potential. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, rising from behind a desk of polished dark wood, "to what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? I thought Mr. Wolfe preferred to conduct business from the comfort of his own domain." "He does," I confirmed, settling into the chair he indicated. "But some information requires a field trip, specifically the financial creativity of the Culinary Alliance." The smile never wavered, but something shifted behind his eyes. "My attorney, Mr. Dell, advised me yesterday about Mr. Wolfe's expansive interpretation of his investigative authority. Mr. Dell's the same lawyer who established Prospero Events, the shell corporation that's been siphoning scholarship funds from the Alliance. Nearly $500,000 over 2 years, all authorized by forged signatures. For a fleeting second, the professional mask slipped. A flicker of surprise, quickly controlled, but I caught it. Prospero Events? I'm not familiar with that entity. Really? Because the registered agent is your personal counsel, and the money flow corresponds exactly with your restaurant expansion timeline. I opened my notebook and consulted it theatrically. Funny how business opportunities seem to follow Alliance fund transfers. Morrison leaned back, his fingers steepled in a gesture that probably worked well with investors. "Mr. Goodwin, I run a successful restaurant empire. I delegate legal and financial matters to trusted professionals. My involvement with the Alliance is philanthropic, not mercenary. You were sitting at Arthur Pembroke's table the night he died. You knew about his severe shellfish allergy. Of course, Arthur was meticulous about his dietary restrictions. He always double-checked ingredients with the kitchen staff. His gaze was steady, almost challenging. Are you suggesting someone deliberately poisoned Arthur? Because the medical examiner ruled it accidental food poisoning. I'm suggesting that someone with intimate knowledge of restaurant operations, ingredient sourcing, and kitchen timing might find it relatively simple to introduce contamination into a specific portion of soup. I understand cuisine, Mr. Goodwin. Not crime. As I prepared to leave, I noticed a framed photograph on his credenza. It showed a younger Morrison with Margaret Sims, both beaming, standing in front of a restaurant with a grand opening banner. The body language suggested more than professional acquaintance, the kind of comfortable intimacy that comes from shared history and mutual ambition. "Old friends?" I asked, nodding toward the photograph. Morrison's smile tightened slightly. "Margaret helped me secure my first major investor. We've maintained a professional relationship over the years. Professional enough to involve coordinated financial planning. Good day, Mr. Goodwin." Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe in the office, having completed his afternoon descent from the plant rooms. He was examining a letter that had arrived in my absence, his expression suggesting it contained something more interesting than the usual bills and solicitations. "Morrison's definitely involved in the embezzlement," I reported, settling into my chair. He tried to play ignorant about Prospero events, but his reaction gave him away. Plus, there's a cozy photograph of him with Margaret Sims from what looks like a restaurant opening years ago. Wolfe set down the letter. A partnership of longer standing than their alliance board service would suggest. "What's the letter?" "A communication from Ms. March. She has been receiving anonymous telephone calls suggesting she terminate our investigation. The caller mentioned specific details about Saturday evening that were not reported in the newspapers." I felt the familiar tightening in my chest that comes when a case shifts from intellectual exercise to personal threat. Someone's getting nervous. "Someone is revealing themselves," Wolfe corrected. "The calls demonstrate that our investigation is approaching uncomfortable truths. They also suggest that the perpetrator has access to information about our client relationship." Inside knowledge. Precisely. The caller knew Ms. March had retained our services before that information was widely available. Wolfe opened a bottle of beer and poured it with his usual ceremonial precision, which narrows our field considerably. I thought about Morrison's calculated responses, Margaret Sims's defensive posture during her visit, Sarah Walsh's nervous energy. Any of our alliance suspects could have that information. Indeed. But consider the psychology, Archie. Anonymous threats represent a departure from the subtle approach used in Mr. Pembroke's murder. Our perpetrator is feeling pressure, becoming reactive rather than proactive. Which means we're close. Which means they're about to make a mistake. Wolfe took a measured sip of beer. "Tomorrow, you will contact all members of the Alliance Board, along with Ms. Sims and Ms. Walsh. Inform them that I require their presence in this office at 5 o'clock. Tell them I've uncovered critical information regarding Mr. Pembroke's death and the financial irregularities surrounding it. That's going to create quite a stir. It will create pressure. And pressure, properly applied, reveals structural weaknesses." His smile was thin and cold. "Be sure to mention that I've identified the individual responsible for forging Mr. Pembroke's signature on financial documents." "Do we actually know who that is?" "We know it was someone with access to alliance paperwork and sufficient skill to fool bank officials for months. We know it was coordinated with the embezzlement scheme run through Prospero events. We know the perpetrator had intimate knowledge of Mr. Pembroke's habits and medical conditions." Wolfe set down his beer glass. "Tomorrow, we will discover which of our suspects possesses all those qualifications. And if they don't show up, they'll show up," Wolfe said with certainty. "Guilty parties rarely resist the opportunity to discover how much we actually know. They come hoping to learn the extent of our evidence and instead reveal the extent of their culpability." As I prepared to make the calls, I found myself thinking about silver spoons and forged signatures, about the delicate balance between greed and desperation that turns respected citizens into murderers. Someone in the refined world of the Culinary Alliance had decided that Arthur Pembroke's inconvenient questions deserved a permanent answer. Tomorrow, we would discover who possessed the cold-blooded calculation to serve death on a silver spoon. The brownstone, usually a sanctuary of quiet contemplation, was about to become a pressure cooker. The calls I made that afternoon were brief but illuminating. Margaret Sims accepted the invitation with icy professionalism, but I could hear the tension beneath her controlled tone. Morrison tried to decline, claiming a prior engagement, but changed his mind when I mentioned the signature forgery. Dr. Vasquez agreed immediately, her curiosity apparently outweighing any concerns. Vincent Hartwell sounded relieved, as if he welcomed the opportunity to clear his name. Sarah Walsh's voice trembled so badly I could barely understand her acceptance. Only Celia March seemed genuinely eager for the confrontation. "It's time for the truth to come out," she said. "Arthur deserves justice." By evening, the stage was set. 6 suspects, each with motive, means, and opportunity. One murderer, about to discover that Nero Wolfe's reputation for exposing the truth was not merely legend. The brownstone settled into its familiar evening quiet, but beneath the surface, tension hummed like electricity through the walls. Tomorrow would bring answers, justice, and the kind of intellectual satisfaction that made Wolfe's methods legendary. Someone had committed what they believed was the perfect crime. They were about to learn that perfection, like beauty, exists mainly in the eye of the beholder. The morning of our scheduled confrontation began with an affront that transformed Nero Wolfe from a sedentary investigator into something approaching a force of nature. At 8:15, while Wolfe communed with his orchids and I sorted through the morning mail, Fritz appeared in the office doorway with an expression I had seen only once before, when a delivery truck had accidentally crushed his herb garden. "Archie," he said, his voice tight with controlled outrage, "someone has been in my kitchen." I set down the electric bill and followed him downstairs, where Fritz's domain told a story of careful violation. The small window above the herb sink showed fresh scratches on the latch. A faint smudge on the sill suggested glove powder. Most telling of all, an empty space in Fritz's precisely arranged collection of oils and vinegars, marked where a bottle of Colatura di Alici had stood the night before. "Colatura is not something you misplace," Fritz said grimly, opening the pantry door. On the second shelf, tucked behind the flour bin like a guilty secret, sat an unlabeled jar with a screw-on lid. I opened it and caught the harsh industrial scent of mass-produced anchovy paste, the kind of product that bore no resemblance to Fritz's carefully curated ingredients. "I do not buy paste," Fritz continued. "I make what I need from whole anchovies. That jar was not here last night." We examined the evidence together: the violated window, the missing artisanal colatura, the planted industrial paste. Someone had entered our sanctuary, stolen sophistication, and left behind crude substitution. The message was clear. They wanted to create a narrative that would implicate Fritz's kitchen in Arthur Pembroke's death. When Wolfe descended from the plant rooms at 11 sharp, I presented him with a complete inventory of our uninvited guests' activities. He listened without interruption, his face growing darker with each detail. "You touched nothing beyond the jar?" he asked Fritz. "Nothing. I knew it did not belong." "Excellent. Archie, you will take that jar to Dr. Vollmer immediately. Request analysis for shellfish proteins and industrial additives. Also ask him to expedite testing on the spoon samples we sent yesterday." Wolfe settled into his chair with the deliberate weight of a mountain choosing its position. If our visitor believes they can alter evidence in my kitchen, they have miscalculated severely. "They're getting desperate," I observed. "Desperation leads to errors," Wolfe replied, "and errors lead to exposure." As I prepared to leave for Dr. Vollmer's office, the doorbell rang. Through the one-way glass, I could see a young man in a courier's uniform, clipboard in hand, affecting the practiced slouch of someone making routine deliveries. "Pick up for Mr. Goodwin," he announced when I opened the door. "From Dr. Vollmer, the samples." "Show me your authorization," I said pleasantly. He shifted his weight, suddenly less confident. "I'm running behind, mister. Got 5 more stops." "And you're about to have one more," I said, closing the door firmly. By the time I reached the front window, he was already moving at a good clip toward a gray compact car double-parked at the hydrant. The license plates were temporary and out of state, but I wrote down the numbers anyway. Wolfe had been listening from the office. "Amateurs," he muttered with profound distaste. "Call Saul Panzer. I want surveillance on our block and investigation of that vehicle." Saul's response was everything you hope for when your home has become a target. Calm, professional, immediately available. Within an hour, he had identified the rental car as being leased to Ascendant Dining Group, James Morrison's hospitality consultancy. He also positioned himself across the street with a newspaper and the kind of patience that makes him worth every dollar of his considerable fee. "There's a man in a brown jacket pretending to read yesterday's sports section," Saul reported by phone. "He's been watching your door for 20 minutes and hasn't turned a single page." "Let him watch," I said. "Fritz is still cooking." Dr. Vollmer's preliminary analysis arrived by secure courier at 2 o'clock. A real courier from our regular service, whose driver asked about the orchids and accepted Fritz's coffee with genuine appreciation. The results confirmed our suspicions with scientific precision. The spoon contained concentrated shellfish proteins, deliberately applied. The planted anchovy paste was contaminated with shrimp residue and industrial binders that had no place in any legitimate kitchen. Whoever made this paste didn't care about purity, Vollmer had noted in his report. It's designed to do a job, not enhance flavor. When I returned to the office after securing the evidence, I discovered another small violation of our sanctuary. The financial documents Sarah Walsh had provided were spread across my desk exactly as I had left them, with one crucial exception. A page detailing the Alliance's investment portfolio was missing. Not misfiled, not misplaced. Removed with surgical precision. "The coffee-stained page," I told Wolfe, explaining the absence. "The one that showed which specific investments were liquidated to fund the Prospero events transfers." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Miss Walsh was alone with those documents while you escorted her previous visitors to the door. She would know the significance of that particular page, and she is clearly under considerable pressure." From Margaret Sims. From someone who understands that we are closer to the truth than they can afford. Wolfe opened a bottle of beer and poured it with ceremonial precision. The kitchen violation, the attempted evidence theft, the surveillance, the missing document, these are not the actions of someone confident in their position. They are the desperate measures of someone who realizes their perfect crime is unraveling. By 4 o'clock, I had completed the office preparations for our evening gathering. 6 chairs arranged in a careful semicircle, each positioned to allow Wolfe optimal observation of facial expressions and body language. The red leather chair remained in its traditional place of honor, reserved for whoever would occupy the hot seat. The silver spoon rested in its velvet case on Wolfe's desk, a silent reminder of the weapon that had transformed a charity dinner into a murder scene. Fritz had prepared a coffee and his famous almond cookies, because even confrontations with murderers required proper hospitality in our world. The missing document folder sat prominently on my desk, its absence as meaningful as any evidence we possessed. "The stage is set," I reported to Wolfe, who was reviewing his notes with the concentration of a conductor preparing for a complex symphony. "Indeed. And our audience has already revealed more than they intended." He looked up from his papers. "The violation of Fritz's kitchen was particularly instructive, Archie. It demonstrates not merely desperation, but a fundamental misunderstanding of the forces they have chosen to oppose. Meaning they believe this is simply a matter of evidence and logic, of documents and testimony that can be manipulated or destroyed. They fail to understand that they have committed an offense against hospitality itself, the sacred trust between host and guest, cook and diner." His voice carried the weight of absolute moral authority. "That is not merely a crime, Archie. It is a desecration." At 4:30, the doorbell began its evening symphony. Margaret Sims arrived first, her navy blue suit and briefcase suggesting she had brought legal reinforcements. James Morrison followed. Minutes later, his restaurant owner's smile firmly in place, but his eyes scanning the room like a man calculating escape routes. Dr. Elena Vasquez came with the punctuality of someone accustomed to reservation schedules. Vincent Hartwell looked like he had aged years since our morning meeting, his silver hair less perfectly groomed, his hands betraying the tremor of mounting stress. Sarah Walsh arrived last, clutching her manila folder like a shield, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed from what appeared to be a sleepless night. She took the chair farthest from Wolfe's desk, as if distance might provide protection from whatever was coming. Celia March positioned herself near the window, her dark suit and determined expression suggesting she was prepared for battle. She watched each arrival with the intensity of someone keeping score. As the clock approached 5, Wolfe made his entrance with the dignity of a judge taking the bench. He settled into his custom chair, opened a bottle of beer with ceremonial precision, and surveyed his assembled audience with the satisfaction of a man who held all the cards. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "you are here because someone among you has committed murder, embezzlement, and the unforgivable violation of my kitchen. Before this evening concludes, that person will be identified, their methods exposed, and justice will be served." The word murder struck the room like a physical blow. The game had begun, and there would be no escape until Nero Wolfe had extracted every last truth from the web of deception that had cost Arthur Pembroke his life. The brownstone, usually a sanctuary of quiet contemplation, had become a crucible. Someone among our guests had made the fatal error of bringing their crimes into our home. Now they would discover that Nero Wolfe's reputation for exposing the truth was not merely legend. It was an immutable force of nature. The silence that followed Wolfe's opening declaration stretched like a taut wire across the office. 6 faces arranged themselves in careful neutrality, but I had watched enough of these confrontations to read the subtle signs beneath their masks. The elevated breathing, the unconscious shifts away from direct eye contact, the hands that moved with studied casualness to conceal trembling. Wolfe poured his beer with deliberate ceremony, the foam rising to the perfect level as he allowed the tension to build like pressure in a steam boiler. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the measured cadence of absolute authority. "You will not interrupt me," he said, setting the glass down with the finality of a gavel. "If you must speak, you will request permission. I will grant or deny it as I see fit." That got a squaring of shoulders from Margaret Sims and a tight smile from James Morrison, who had positioned himself in the chair that most suggested ownership of the room. Dr. Elena Vasquez crossed one ankle over the other with professional composure. Vincent Hartwell's fingers worried the brim of his hat. Sarah Walsh clutched her folder like a shield. Celia March remained standing by the window, watching Wolfe with the intensity of someone keeping score. "Arthur Pembroke," Wolfe continued, "did not die of errant food handling. He died of anaphylactic shock caused by concentrated shellfish protein deliberately introduced into his individual portion of soup. The delivery mechanism was a silver tasting spoon, Ms. March's spoon to be precise, which forensic analysis confirms contained shellfish residue applied with malicious intent." He gestured toward the velvet case on his desk. "The contamination was not accidental kitchen error, but calculated murder. Someone with intimate knowledge of Mr. Pembroke's severe allergies, access to the serving area, and understanding of restaurant operations used that spoon as a weapon." Margaret Sims leaned forward, her briefcase balanced on her knees like armor. "Mr. Wolfe, these are extraordinary accusations. Do you have evidence beyond speculation?" "I have bank records showing systematic transfers of Alliance scholarship funds to Prospero Events, a shell corporation established by Mr. Morrison's attorney. Nearly $500,000 diverted over 2 years through forged signatures on financial documents." Wolfe's gaze moved methodically across each face. I have handwriting analysis proving that Mr. Pembroke's signatures on recent authorizations were counterfeit. I have testimony confirming coercion in this scheme. James Morrison's restaurant smile never wavered, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes. The medical examiner ruled Arthur's death accidental food poisoning, Mr. Wolfe. Are you suggesting a conspiracy involving the coroner's office? I am suggesting the medical examiner was not informed that shellfish extract had been deliberately introduced using industrial-grade anchovy paste as a carrier. Paste contaminated with shrimp proteins and chemical binders that have no place in any legitimate kitchen. Dr. Vasquez spoke for the first time, her food critic's precision evident. That would require a sophisticated knowledge of allergen cross-contamination and flavor masking techniques. Indeed, it would also require nerves of steel to commit murder in a room full of witnesses. Wolfe turned to Sarah Walsh, who had gone pale as parchment. Ms. Walsh, you removed evidence from the serving area after Mr. Pembroke collapsed. Specifically, a jar of anchovy paste that Chef Beaumont had identified as contaminated and out of place. Sarah's voice emerged as barely a whisper. I panicked. I thought if there was contamination, it would destroy the Alliance's reputation. I threw it away. You threw it away, Wolfe repeated with mild interest. Yet early this morning, someone violated the sanctity of my kitchen, stole authentic ingredients, and planted a similar contaminated jar in an obvious attempt to implicate my cook in Mr. Pembroke's death. The room erupted in carefully controlled chaos. Morrison shifted back as if struck. Margaret Sims's briefcase snapped open with sharp, angry movements. Vincent Hartwell made a sound like a man receiving unexpected news. "Someone broke into your home?" Dr. Vasquez asked, her voice sharp with concern. "Someone committed an unforgivable breach of hospitality," Wolfe replied, his voice carrying the weight of moral authority. "They also attempted to intercept forensic evidence and placed surveillance on this building. A gray compact car rented to Mr. Morrison's consulting firm has been monitoring our activities. A man in a brown jacket has been reading the same newspaper across the street for hours without turning a page." Morrison's composure cracked slightly. If one of my people got overzealous about protecting my reputation from unfounded accusations. "Your people," Wolfe interrupted, "attempted to impersonate our medical courier and steal laboratory results. These are not the actions of the innocent, Mr. Morrison." Celia March spoke from her position by the window, her voice cutting through the tension. "Someone also called me yesterday, warning me to dismiss you. They knew details about Saturday night that weren't in the newspapers." This revelation sent fresh ripples of unease through the group. Morrison's eyes narrowed, and Margaret Sims exchanged a quick glance with him that spoke volumes about coordination and shared secrets. "Anonymous threats," Wolfe observed, "betray desperation and inside knowledge." The caller possessed intimate details of Ms. March's actions and fears, suggesting someone within this very circle. He leaned back, his massive frame dominating the room. "Let us examine Saturday evening's sequence. Mr. Pembroke's soup was served several minutes after the rest of his table, a delay that provided crucial opportunity. Dr. Vasquez, you observed this timing anomaly." "Yes," she confirmed. Sarah Walsh apologized, saying something about ensuring perfect temperature. At the time, it seemed like normal kitchen coordination. "Normal coordination," Wolfe repeated, "or calculated opportunity. Miss Walsh, during those crucial minutes, who had access to the serving area?" Sarah's hands trembled as she consulted her mental inventory. "I was supervising the floor staff. Margaret came back twice to speak with the service captain. Mr. Morrison visited once, discussing wine pairings with Chef Beaumont. Several board members moved through the area during cocktails." "Including Miss March herself," Wolfe noted, "who, according to your earlier statement, spent considerable time ensuring there were no allergens that might affect Mr. Pembroke." Vincent Hartwell suddenly straightened in his chair. "I saw Margaret at the serving station during cocktails. She was examining the spoons, holding them up to the light, checking the finish. When she noticed me watching, she put them down and left quickly. Margaret Sims's professional mask showed its first crack. I maintain quality standards, Mr. Hartwell. It's literally my responsibility. Quality standards, Wolfe mused, or opportunity assessment. You were positioned to observe which spoon would be used for which guest, to understand the service timing, to introduce contamination during the confusion of cocktail service. The house phone rang, cutting through the tension. I answered to find Saul Panzer's unhurried voice. "Archie, your brown jacket just made a call from the corner payphone. He said, Wolfe's got them all in there. He's pushing Sims hard." Then he met with Morrison's operations director, fellow named Rusk. "I've got photographs." I relayed this information, watching Morrison's restaurant smile finally dissolve completely. "Overzealous staff," he said weakly. "I'll terminate him immediately." "After coordinating surveillance and evidence tampering," Wolfe replied coldly. "Ms. Sims, yesterday at 3:20, someone called Miss March from the Alliance's telephone system, referencing details of Saturday night not available to the public. If not you, then who?" For the first time, something fundamental shifted in Margaret Sims's composure. "Our phone system is accessible to multiple staff members. I was in a meeting at 3:20. "With whom?" Wolfe asked. "James," she replied, then realized the trap too late. "Here," Morrison confirmed quickly. "At my restaurant, we discussed seating arrangements for the gala." "Of course," Wolfe murmured. "Miss Walsh, the missing page from your document folder, the one detailing specific investment liquidations, did you return it to Ms. Sims?" Sarah flinched as if struck. "She asked for it back this morning, said it was internal Alliance property that shouldn't leave the office." "Would you care to produce that page now, Ms. Sims?" I asked pleasantly. "Save us the trouble of a subpoena." Margaret Sims's mouth thinned to a razor line. "I don't carry Alliance documents into private homes." "Except when you do," Wolfe observed, his attention focused not on her briefcase but on her hands, which had moved fractionally toward it when I mentioned the document. The office clock ticked into the silence, marking seconds that felt like hours. Each face in the room showed different stages of calculation, fear, and dawning comprehension. Wolfe folded his hands across his considerable middle. "The financial scheme is clear. Systematic embezzlement through forged signatures, with Ms. Walsh coerced into participating, and Mr. Morrison receiving the stolen funds through his shell corporation. The murder method is established. Deliberate contamination using shellfish extract delivered via a specific spoon during a calculated service delay." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across each suspect. "What remains is identifying which of you possessed the cold-blooded calculation to turn a charity dinner into a murder scene, to violate the sacred trust between host and guest, and to compound those offenses by attempting to corrupt my kitchen with false evidence." Margaret Sims stood abruptly, her professional composure finally cracking beyond repair. "Mr. Wolfe, you're constructing a fantasy from coincidences and innuendo. Arthur's death was a tragic accident, nothing more." "Then you should welcome a complete investigation to clear your name," Wolfe replied. "Instead, you have coordinated surveillance, evidence tampering, and intimidation. These are not the actions of the innocent, Ms. Sims." Sarah Walsh suddenly burst into tears, her folder falling to the floor as her hands flew to her face. "I can't do this anymore. Margaret, just tell them the truth. Tell them what really happened." "Sarah, be quiet," Margaret snapped, but her authority was fragmenting. "No!" Sarah's voice rose to near hysteria. "Arthur was a good man. He didn't deserve to die because you were stealing money. Tell them about the signatures you made me forge. Tell them about the anchovy paste and how you knew exactly which spoon would be used." The confession hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Margaret Sims looked around the room with the expression of a cornered predator, her carefully constructed facade finally abandoned. "Arthur Pembroke," she said with quiet venom, "was going to destroy 20 years of work over accounting technicalities. The Alliance has helped hundreds of young chefs, created opportunities, built something meaningful. Arthur would have sacrificed all of that for his obsession with procedural correctness. So you killed him, Wolfe stated simply. Margaret's smile was cold and empty. I protected what we built. Arthur's death was regrettable, but necessary. The doorbell rang with official authority, cutting through the electric tension. Through the one-way glass, I could see Inspector Kramer's familiar bulk, flanked by two detectives whose presence suggested this was not a social call. That would be the police, Wolfe said with satisfaction. I took the liberty of requesting their presence for the conclusion of our discussion. Margaret Sims closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with something approaching relief. I suppose it's finished then. Justice, Wolfe replied, has a way of asserting itself regardless of human preference. The violation of hospitality, the corruption of charity, the murder of a good man. These offenses demand answers. As I moved to admit Inspector Kramer, I reflected on the evening's revelations. A silver spoon had become a weapon, a charity dinner had become a crime scene, and the sanctity of our kitchen had been violated by desperate criminals. But Nero Wolfe's reputation for exposing truth had proven stronger than any conspiracy. The brownstone would return to its quiet dignity, Fritz would restore his kitchen to proper order, and Arthur Pembroke would finally receive the justice that had been stolen, along with his life. Some violations, I thought as I opened the door to official justice, simply cannot be forgiven. Inspector Kramer entered our office like a force of nature that had decided on thunder and lightning simultaneously. His bulk filled the doorway, his weathered face carrying the expression of a man who had received Wolfe's preliminary report and understood that his evening would involve considerably more paperwork than originally planned. Behind him, Sergeant Pearlie Stebbins positioned himself with the practiced efficiency of someone who had attended enough of these gatherings to know that exits would soon become important. "Wolfe," Kramer grunted, his eyes making a quick inventory of the assembled faces. "Your message suggested we might find this educational. I hope you've got something more substantial than your usual philosophical meandering." "Inspector," Wolfe replied, settling deeper into his chair with visible satisfaction. "I have a confession, a complete reconstruction of method, and sufficient evidence to satisfy even your demanding standards. Ms. Margaret Sims has just acknowledged that Arthur Pembroke's death was regrettable but necessary to prevent his exposure of systematic embezzlement." The temperature in the room dropped perceptibly. Kramer's attention fixed on Margaret Sims like a searchlight finding its target. "Is that accurate, Ms. Sims?" Margaret Sims met his gaze with the brittle composure of someone whose carefully constructed world had collapsed beyond repair. Arthur was going to destroy everything we built over accounting technicalities. 20 years of scholarships, opportunities for young chefs, all sacrificed for his obsession with bureaucratic correctness. "So you killed him," Kramer stated flatly. "I protected what mattered," she replied, her voice carrying the cold conviction of someone who had calculated the moral mathematics and reached an unforgivable conclusion. Wolfe opened the velvet case on his desk, revealing the silver spoon that had initiated our investigation. "Inspector, this tasting spoon contains concentrated shellfish proteins, specifically industrial-grade anchovy paste contaminated with shrimp residue. Laboratory analysis confirms deliberate application to the serving surface." He gestured toward the assembled documents. "The financial evidence reveals systematic embezzlement of Alliance scholarship funds through Prospero Events, a shell corporation established by Mr. Morrison's attorney. Nearly $500,000 diverted over 2 years through forged signatures. Forgeries coerced from Ms. Walsh under the pretense of temporary investment maneuvers." Sarah Walsh looked up from her tear-stained hands. She showed me documents with Arthur's signature. She said he had approved everything, but when he started asking questions— "When Mr. Pembroke began to investigate discrepancies," Wolfe continued, "when he expressed confusion over financial decisions he supposedly authorized, he became inconvenient. Ms. Sims possessed intimate knowledge of his severe shellfish allergies, access to the serving protocols, and the cold calculation necessary to transform a charity dinner into a murder scene. James Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his restaurant owner's smile having long since abandoned him. "Inspector, I can explain the financial arrangements." "You can explain them downtown," Kramer interrupted, his tone suggesting that explanations would be provided under considerably more formal circumstances. Wolfe leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on the methodical rhythm of a prosecutor presenting irrefutable evidence. The method was sophisticated, yet simple. During the cocktail hour, Ms. Sims approached the serving area, ostensibly to inspect the engraved spoons for quality, as Mr. Hartwell observed. In reality, she was identifying Ms. March's spoon and assessing her opportunity. Vincent Hartwell's face went pale. She was examining them so carefully, holding them up to the light. She then took advantage of a service delay for Mr. Pembroke's soup portion, a delay Dr. Vasquez noted, to ensure the contaminated spoon would be used for his serving. The shellfish extract, masked by the rich flavor profile of Chef Beaumont's butternut squash bisque, triggered rapid anaphylactic shock in a man whose allergy was severe enough to make even trace amounts lethal. Dr. Vasquez found her voice. "The delayed service, I assumed it was normal kitchen coordination." "It was calculated murder," Wolfe replied with cold precision. The jar of anchovy paste that Ms. Walsh removed from the serving area was positioned as a hedge, an accidental explanation if the contamination was discovered. When that failed to materialize as intended, a similar jar was planted in my kitchen this morning in a desperate attempt to shift suspicion. Kramer's notebook was filling rapidly. "The break-in at your place?" "An unforgivable violation of hospitality," Wolfe said, his voice carrying the weight of moral authority. "Along with the attempted theft of forensic evidence, the surveillance on this building, and the intimidation calls to Miss March, all desperate measures by guilty parties attempting to obscure truth." Margaret Sims had been listening with the rigid composure of someone watching their own execution. Now she spoke, her voice carrying a bitter edge. "Arthur would have exposed the transfers, demanded investigations, destroyed our credibility with donors. Hundreds of future scholarships would have been lost because of his rigid principles." "So you decided he had to die," Kramer stated. "I decided the alliance was more important than one man's obsession with procedural correctness." Her mask finally slipped completely, revealing the cold calculation beneath. The money was being used for good purposes, just more efficiently than Arthur's conservative approach allowed. "Efficiently," Wolfe repeated with profound distaste. "You embezzled scholarship funds to finance Mr. Morrison's restaurant expansion, then murdered the man who discovered your theft. That is not efficiency, Ms. Sims. That is avarice compounded by homicide." The confession hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Around the room, faces showed various stages of shock, disgust, and dawning comprehension. Sarah Walsh collapsed into fresh tears. Celia March closed her eyes as if in prayer. Dr. Vasquez stared at Margaret Sims as if seeing a stranger. Kramer stood, his movements signaling the transition from investigation to justice. "Margaret Sims, you're under arrest for the murder of Arthur Pembroke. James Morrison, you're under arrest for conspiracy, embezzlement, and accessory after the fact. Sarah Walsh, you'll need to come with us for questioning, but your cooperation will be noted." The formal recitation of rights filled the office with official gravity. Margaret Sims submitted to the handcuffs with the resignation of someone who had calculated the odds and lost. Morrison maintained his professional composure even as the metal clicked around his wrists, though his face had gone the color of old parchment. "Inspector," Wolfe said as Kramer prepared to depart with his prisoners, "you will find the missing financial document in Ms. Sims's briefcase, the page detailing specific investment liquidations that funded the embezzlement scheme." Kramer nodded grimly. "Stebbins, check the briefcase and get that surveillance team Morrison had watching this place." As the procession moved toward the door, Sims walking with rigid dignity between uniforms, Morrison stumbling slightly as reality settled around him like a shroud, the office began its slow return to normal dimensions. The air seemed less crowded, the shadows less oppressive. Vincent Hartwell cleared his throat, his voice hoarse with shock. My spoons were meant to enhance appreciation of fine cuisine, not deliver death. Your craftsmanship is not diminished by its perversion, Mr. Hartwell, Wolfe assured him. The fault lies with those who corrupted its purpose. Dr. Vasquez lingered, her professional composure shaken. To think such corruption could fester at the heart of something we believed in so deeply. Corruption, Dr. Vasquez, is most insidious when cloaked in the guise of virtue, Wolfe observed. The Alliance, in its pursuit of prestige and influence, allowed its moral foundations to erode. Mr. Pembroke sought to shore them up, and for that, he paid the ultimate price. After the others departed, Celia March remained by the window, looking down at 35th Street, as if she could see all the way back to Saturday night and the moment when everything changed. "Thank you," she said without turning. "Arthur would have been pleased to see justice served with proper attention to truth and detail." "Justice, Ms. March, requires no gratitude," Wolfe replied. "It is simply the natural order reasserting itself after disruption." She opened her purse and withdrew an envelope. "The balance of your fee, plus a bonus for exposing the financial crimes. The Alliance Board will meet tomorrow to establish proper oversight and restore the scholarship program to its intended purpose. And the gala will proceed as a memorial to Arthur. The Golden Ladle Awards will honor his commitment to helping young chefs achieve their dreams, properly funded this time." When the last of our visitors had departed, I found myself alone with Wolfe in the quiet office, the evening's drama settling into memory like sediment in still water. "A silver spoon," I observed, "transformed from instrument of pleasure into weapon of death by greed and desperation." "The perversion of hospitality," Wolfe replied, reaching for his beer, "is among the most fundamental of human violations. The dinner table represents trust, sharing, the civilized exchange of sustenance and conversation. To corrupt that sacred space with murder is an offense against the very foundations of society." Fritz appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray with coffee and his famous almond cookies. His kitchen had been restored to proper order, the violated sanctity cleansed and renewed. "The evening's work is complete?" he asked. "Complete and satisfactory," Wolfe confirmed. "Justice has been served, the guilty have been exposed, and our kitchen's honor has been restored." As Fritz departed, I reflected on the case's resolution. Margaret Sims had believed herself clever enough to commit the perfect crime, using the tools of hospitality as weapons of death. She had failed to account for Nero Wolfe's fundamental understanding that some violations simply cannot be tolerated. "The Alliance will survive this," I said, more statement than question. "Under proper leadership, it will flourish," Wolfe replied. "Arthur Pembroke's vision of helping young chefs will continue, but without the corruption that cost him his life." The brownstone settled into its familiar evening quiet, the kind of peace that follows the successful completion of necessary work. Outside, the city continued its eternal rhythm, but here in our sanctuary, order had been restored. Wolfe opened another bottle of beer and poured it with ceremonial precision. "Tomorrow, Archie, we will attend to the detritus. Statements, invoices, the formal conclusion of our obligations. And dinner." He closed his eyes, and something approaching contentment returned to his face. "Fritz is preparing osso buco. The marrow will remind us what a spoon is truly for." As I prepared my final notes on the case, I found myself thinking about silver spoons and hidden murders, about the delicate balance between trust and betrayal that makes the difference between charity and crime. Someone in the refined world of the Culinary Alliance had decided that Arthur Pembroke's inconvenient questions deserved a permanent answer. They had been wrong. In Nero Wolfe's world, truth has a way of asserting itself regardless of human preference, and justice, properly pursued, is stronger than any conspiracy. The spoon that had carried death would be returned to its proper purpose, and the memory of Arthur Pembroke would be honored by the continuation of his charitable work, honestly funded this time. Some violations, I reflected as I locked away the evidence, simply cannot be forgiven. But they can be answered, and in that answer, a kind of peace can be found. The brownstone had weathered another storm, and tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight justice had been served, and that was enough. The morning after justice had been served brought Inspector Kramer to our door at precisely 9 o'clock, carrying himself with the satisfied air of a man whose paperwork had finally aligned with reality. He settled into the red leather chair with something approaching contentment, his unlit cigar making the familiar journey from one corner of his mouth to the other. "Your confession held up, Wolfe," he announced without preamble. "Sims broke completely once we showed her the forensic evidence on the spoon. She's detailing the entire embezzlement scheme, trying to minimize Morrison's involvement, but his own records prove he knew exactly where the money came from." Wolfe, having descended from his morning communion with the orchids, opened a bottle of beer and poured it with ceremonial precision. "Ms. Sims possessed considerable administrative talent, Inspector. It is unfortunate she chose to apply to criminal enterprises." "Morrison's lawyer is already floating plea negotiations," Kramer continued. "Sarah Walsh is cooperating fully. Her testimony should seal both cases. The Alliance Board is meeting today to establish new oversight procedures." After Kramer departed in his usual wake of municipal efficiency and tobacco aroma, the brownstone began its slow return to normal rhythms. Fritz appeared in the office doorway, carrying a small silver tray with 3 items that spoke of restoration: a simple spoon, a small bowl, and a piece of perfectly toasted bread. "The kitchen," he announced with quiet dignity, "has been cleansed of its violations. The window has a new latch, the oils have been properly arranged, and I have procured authentic colatura from a source whose reputation spans generations." The afternoon brought Dr. Elena Vasquez, carrying herself with renewed purpose and a small wrapped package. She settled into the red leather chair and placed her offering on Wolfe's desk. "A token of appreciation, Mr. Wolfe," she said, watching as he unwrapped a bottle of aged balsamic vinegar, its amber color suggesting decades of patient development. "Aceto balsamico tradizionale, aged 25 years. Arthur would have appreciated the gesture. He understood that some things are worth preserving properly, whether culinary traditions or moral principles. Wolfe examined the bottle with reverent attention. "This represents not merely aging, Dr. Vasquez, but authentic craftsmanship, the antithesis of Ms. Sims's corrupted shortcuts." "I've been reflecting on how we missed the signs," she admitted. "Margaret seemed so dedicated to the Alliance's mission." "The most dangerous criminals," Wolfe observed, "are those who commit their crimes in service of what they perceive as higher purposes. Ms. Sims convinced herself that theft was efficiency, murder was necessity, corruption was pragmatism." Later, Sarah Walsh arrived, transformed from the nervous wreck of our confrontation into someone approaching confidence. "The district attorney offered me immunity in exchange for testimony," she reported. "Dr. Vasquez recommended me to the James Beard Foundation. They need someone to coordinate their scholarship programs with proper oversight." "Redemption," Wolfe noted after she departed, "requires both acknowledgement of error and commitment to better choices. Ms. Walsh appears capable of both." As evening settled over the brownstone, Fritz announced that dinner was served. The osso buco arrived with ceremonial gravity, its rich aroma chasing away the last vestiges of the case's grim associations. Wolfe contemplated his plate, then began to eat with a profound appreciation of a man whose appetites were as refined as his intellect. Midway through the meal, after carefully extracting marrow from a particularly succulent bone, he paused, his fork poised in reflection. "The spoon's purpose," he said quietly, "is to convey sustenance, to nourish. To pervert such an instrument into a means of death, to corrupt the very act of sharing a meal, represents a profound moral depravity." He looked at me with rare depth of feeling. Margaret Sims believed she was protecting a greater good, but a good built upon theft and murder is inherently rotten. The table, the shared repast, is a fundamental pillar of civilization. To poison it is to strike at the heart of human trust. "So the crime wasn't just against Arthur Pembroke," I observed, "but against hospitality itself." "Precisely. The violation of Fritz's kitchen this morning was not merely criminal trespass. It was desecration of the sacred compact between host and guest, cook and diner." His voice carried absolute moral authority. "Such violations demand not merely legal justice, but moral reckoning." Fritz reappeared with the aged balsamic, drizzling a small amount into a bowl where its complex aroma rose like incense. Wolfe dipped bread delicately, tasted with appropriate reverence, and closed his eyes in appreciation. "Extraordinary," he murmured. "This vinegar achieved what Miss Sims never understood, true value through patient, honest development." As the brownstone settled into its familiar evening quiet, I completed the final paperwork. The case files were stacked neatly, ready for storage in our archives, but the deeper implications continued to resonate. "The alliance will recover," I said. "Under proper leadership it will flourish," Wolfe replied, reaching for another beer. "Arthur Pembroke's vision will continue, but with the ethical foundations he died defending." The silver spoon would be returned to Celia March, cleansed of its association with murder and restored to its proper purpose. Like the brownstone itself, it would carry forward the memory of violation, but serve only authentic purposes. Wolfe opened his beer with ceremonial care. "Tomorrow, Archie, we return to our normal routines, but tonight we dine in celebration of honest craftsmanship and the triumph of moral order over corrupted ambition." As Fritz's perfect meal concluded our imperfect case, I reflected that some traditions, like justice properly pursued and hospitality honestly offered, were worth preserving exactly as they were. The murder hidden in the spoon had been exposed, but more importantly, the spoon had been returned to its rightful purpose. In Nero Wolfe's world, that was the best possible ending to any story. The morning after justice had been served brought Inspector Kramer to our door at precisely 9 o'clock, carrying himself with the satisfied air of a man whose paperwork had finally aligned with reality. He settled into the red leather chair with something approaching contentment, his unlit cigar making the familiar journey from one corner of his mouth to the other. "Your confession held up, Wolfe," he announced without preamble. "Sims broke completely once we showed her the forensic evidence on the spoon. She's detailing the entire embezzlement scheme, trying to minimize Morrison's involvement, but his own records prove he knew exactly where the money came from." Wolfe, having descended from his morning communion with the orchids, opened a bottle of beer and poured it with ceremonial precision. "Miss Sims possessed considerable administrative talent, Inspector. It is unfortunate she chose to apply it to criminal enterprises. Morrison's lawyer is already floating plea negotiations," Kramer continued. "Sarah Walsh is cooperating fully. Her testimony should seal both cases. That operations director of Morrison's, fellow named Rusk, folded like a souffle in a draft once we showed him Panzer's photographs." After Kramer departed in his usual wake of municipal efficiency and tobacco aroma, the brownstone began its slow return to normal rhythms. The violation of our sanctuary had been addressed, but restoration required more than legal resolution. Fritz appeared in the office doorway, carrying a small silver tray with 3 items that spoke of renewal: a simple spoon, a small bowl, and a piece of perfectly toasted bread. "The kitchen has been cleansed of its violations," he announced with quiet dignity. "The window has a new latch, the oils have been properly arranged, and I have procured authentic colatura from a source whose reputation spans generations." The afternoon brought Sarah Walsh, transformed from the nervous wreck of our confrontation into someone approaching confidence. "The district attorney offered me immunity in exchange for testimony," she reported. "Dr. Vasquez recommended me to the James Beard Foundation. They need someone to coordinate their scholarship programs with proper oversight." "Redemption," Wolfe noted after she departed, "requires both acknowledgement of error and commitment to better choices. Ms. Walsh appears capable of both." Later came Vincent Hartwell, carrying himself with renewed purpose and a small felt pouch. "I've completed the restoration," he said, drawing out Celia March's silver spoon, now polished to mirror brightness. He turned it over to reveal a tiny, discreet monogram on the underside: AP, in an elegant oval cartouche. The mark is subtle, visible only to those who know to look for it. A private memorial to integrity. 2 weeks later, I found myself in the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, representing Wolfe at the Culinary Alliance's rescheduled Golden Ladle Gala. The event had been transformed from routine celebration into something approaching redemption. Celia March, now confirmed as permanent executive director, had insisted on proceeding with the memorial dinner, but with profound changes in both purpose and management. "The Arthur Pembroke Memorial Fund has been established," she told me during cocktails, "with independent oversight and transparent criteria. The first scholarships will be awarded next month to young chefs who demonstrate both culinary talent and ethical commitment." Dr. Elena Vasquez joined our conversation, her food critic's precision evident in every word. "We've restructured everything: multiple reviewers, rotating oversight, full financial transparency. Arthur's death taught us that good intentions aren't enough without systems that prevent corruption." The evening's centerpiece was the presentation of the newly established Arthur Pembroke Memorial Prize for Ethical Leadership, awarded to a young chef from Detroit who had transformed abandoned lots into urban farms while training local residents in culinary skills. "Arthur Pembroke understood that cooking is about more than food," the recipient said, holding his golden ladle with obvious reverence. "It's about nourishing communities, creating opportunities, and maintaining the trust that makes sharing a meal possible." Returning to the brownstone near midnight, I found Wolfe in the office, reading a seed catalogue with a bottle of beer at his elbow. He looked up expectantly as I entered, and I provided a complete report on the evening's proceedings: the genuine commitment to reform, the Memorial Fund's establishment, the Alliance's transformation from corrupted institution to renewed purpose. "Satisfactory," he replied, closing the catalogue. "Redemption, properly pursued, requires both acknowledgement of failure and commitment to better choices. The Alliance appears capable of both." The following evening brought Fritz's own celebration of restored order, a classic pot au feu, rich with slow-simmered beef and vegetables that spoke of patience, tradition, and the nourishing power of honest ingredients. As we dined in comfortable silence, Wolfe finally allowed himself the luxury of extended reflection. "The human capacity for self-deception is truly boundless, Archie," he began, setting down his fork with deliberate precision. "Miss Sims believed she was serving a greater good while simultaneously engaging in theft and murder. She corrupted the very essence of charity, transforming generosity into avarice and hospitality into a weapon." He leaned back, his eyes reflecting the lamplight. "The spoon, in its proper use, conveys sustenance. It is a tool for nourishment, for comfort, for the civilized sharing of life's bounty. To witness its perversion into an instrument of death was a profound offense against the very essence of human connection. The violation of Fritz's kitchen compounded that offense, striking at the sacred compact between host and guest. Wolfe took a measured sip of his after-dinner coffee. Some individuals mistake expediency for efficiency, believing that ends justify any means. They fail to comprehend that true value lies not in the accumulation of wealth or power, but in the honest pursuit of purpose, whether cultivating an orchid, preparing a perfect meal, or pursuing justice with unwavering integrity. So the moral of the story, I said, is that you shouldn't mess with a man's dinner, especially if that man happens to employ Nero Wolfe as his investigator. Wolfe allowed a faint smile to touch his lips. That, Archie, is a simplification, but not entirely inaccurate. The brownstone stands as a testament to order and integrity. Our work, in its essence, to restore that order when it is disrupted by the chaos of human ambition and moral compromise. As the brownstone settled into its familiar night quiet, I completed my final notes on the case. The murder hidden in the spoon had been exposed, the guilty had been punished, and the violated institution had been restored to its proper purpose. The silver spoon would return to its intended function, enhancing appreciation of fine cuisine while carrying the invisible memorial to Arthur Pembroke's integrity. Fritz appeared with a late brandy and the satisfied air of a man whose domain had been cleansed and restored. The kitchen window gleamed with its new latch, the herb garden showed signs of renewed attention, and the faint scent of tomorrow's bread dough promised continuation of proper routines. "Will there be anything else this evening?" Fritz asked. "No," Wolfe replied, his voice carrying the weight of completed satisfaction. "All is as it should be." The next morning would bring new challenges, new disruptions to the natural order that required correction. But tonight, justice had been served with the same careful attention to detail that Fritz brought to his cooking, and the sacred compact between host and guest had been restored to its rightful place at the center of civilized society. In Nero Wolfe's world, that represented the proper order of things. Truth exposed, justice served, and the tools of hospitality returned to their honest purposes. Some traditions, like properly prepared food and carefully pursued justice, were worth preserving exactly as they should be. The murder hidden in the spoon had been revealed, but more importantly, the spoon had been returned to its proper use, and in that return, Arthur Pembroke's memory would be honored not through grand gestures, but through the quiet, daily practice of integrity that makes civilization possible. The brownstone exhaled into silence, its sanctuary restored, its purpose reaffirmed. Tomorrow would bring whatever tomorrow brought, but tonight all was well in the ordered universe of Nero Wolfe. 3 months after Margaret Sims and James Morrison had been sentenced, she to 25 years for murder in the first degree, he to 15 for conspiracy and embezzlement, the brownstone had settled back into its natural rhythm like a symphony returning to its proper key after a discordant passage. The violation of our sanctuary had been answered, the corruption of charity exposed, and justice served with the methodical precision that makes Nero Wolfe's methods legendary. The morning mail brought reminders of why our work mattered beyond the immediate satisfaction of catching murderers. An envelope from the James Beard Foundation contained a photograph of 12 young chefs receiving Arthur Pembroke Memorial Scholarships, their faces bright with the kind of hope that corruption had nearly destroyed. A brief note from Celia March reported that the Alliance had now awarded 47 scholarships through the transparent process she had established, each recipient selected for both culinary talent and ethical commitment. Redemption, Wolfe observed, examining the photograph with satisfaction, requires both acknowledgement of failure and commitment to better choices. The Alliance has proven capable of both. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor who embodied that very principle. Sarah Walsh arrived carrying herself with newfound confidence, the nervous energy of our earlier encounters replaced by purposeful calm. She settled into the red leather chair and placed a small wrapped package on Wolfe's desk. "I wanted to thank you properly," she said, her voice steady and clear. "The James Beard Foundation has promoted me to Director of Scholarship Oversight. Dr. Vasquez recommended me, saying I understood the importance of transparency better than most." She smiled with genuine warmth. "I suppose nearly becoming an accessory to murder provides unique qualifications for preventing corruption." Wolfe unwrapped her gift to reveal a bottle of aged balsamic vinegar, its amber color suggesting decades of patient development. "Aceto, balsamico tradizionale," she explained. 25 years of honest craftsmanship, no shortcuts or corruptions. I thought you'd appreciate the metaphor." "Indeed," Wolfe replied, examining the bottle with reverent attention. "Authentic value achieved through time and integrity, not artificial manipulation. The antithesis of Ms. Sims's corrupted shortcuts." After Sarah departed, I found Wolfe studying the silver spoon that Vincent Hartwell had returned to us, now polished to mirror brightness and bearing a discreet AP memorial engraving on its underside. The craftsman had delivered it along with a complete set of matching pieces, his way of ensuring that the instrument of murder would be transformed into tools of proper hospitality. "Tomorrow evening," Wolfe announced, "Fritz will prepare his celebrated consommé for our dinner. These spoons will serve their first meal in this house, returning to their intended purpose." "Symbolic restoration," I observed. "Practical restoration," he corrected. "The spoon that carried death will now convey life. That, Archie, is how justice completes itself. Not merely through punishment of the guilty, but through restoration of proper order." That evening, Fritz announced dinner with particular ceremony. The menu featured a perfect consommé, so clear you could read newsprint through it, followed by ossobuco, prepared with the meticulous attention that had characterized our investigation. Each ingredient had been selected for quality, each step executed with precision, the final result representing honest craftsmanship elevated to art. As we dined using the restored silver spoons, their weight familiar yet somehow renewed, Wolfe set down his implement and regarded it with the expression he usually reserved for particularly fine orchid specimens. "The spoon," he said quietly, "has become for me a symbol of civilization's essential fragility. Such a simple tool, silver shaped by human hands to serve human needs, to convey nourishment from vessel to mouth, to facilitate the sharing of sustenance that binds communities together." He lifted the spoon again, watching light play across its polished surface. Yet in corrupted hands, guided by perverted purpose, this same instrument became a weapon more deadly than any knife or gun. The violation was not merely of Mr. Pembroke's trust, but of the sacred compact that makes civilized dining possible. "You're saying the crime was bigger than murder and embezzlement?" "I'm saying it struck at the foundation of human society, the ability to break bread together without fear of betrayal." His voice carried the weight of absolute moral authority. "When we cannot trust those who serve our food, when charity becomes a mask for theft, when hospitality conceals homicide, then civilization itself is under assault." Fritz appeared with coffee and his famous almond cookies, the evening ritual that marked the transition from sustenance to contemplation. As he arranged the service with practiced precision, I found myself thinking about the delicate balance between trust and vigilance that makes community possible. The telephone interrupted our reflection with news that brought the case's final resolution into sharp focus. Celia March's voice carried the satisfaction of someone whose faith in justice had been vindicated. "Mr. Wolfe," she reported, "the Alliance Board has voted to establish an annual Arthur Pembroke Memorial Lecture on ethics in non-profit management. We're hoping you might consider delivering the inaugural address on the relationship between hospitality and integrity." Wolfe was quiet for a long moment, his eyes closed in the pose that usually preceded either profound insight or polite refusal. "Ms. March," I'm not a public speaker. However, I believe Fritz might be persuaded to prepare a dinner for your board, during which I could offer some observations on the proper use of power in service of others." "That would be perfect," she replied with obvious delight. After the call ended, Wolfe reached for the evening's book, a pleasant biography of a botanist who had spent his life cultivating beauty while others pursued profit. The parallel was not lost on either of us. "The human capacity for self-deception is truly boundless, Archie," he began, settling deeper into his chair. "Miss Sims believed she was protecting a greater good while simultaneously engaging in theft and murder. She failed to grasp that true integrity, like true craftsmanship, cannot be rushed or compromised without ultimately corrupting the entire enterprise." He looked up from his book with the expression of a man who had witnessed both the worst and best of human nature. Arthur Pembroke understood this. His quiet insistence on honesty was not bureaucratic rigidity, but moral courage. His death was not an inconvenience to be managed, but a profound indictment of the decay Miss Sims had fostered. As the brownstone settled into its familiar night quiet, I completed the final entry in our case files. The murder hidden in the spoon had been exposed, but more importantly, the spoon had been returned to its honest work. The violation of hospitality had been answered, the corruption of charity had been cleansed, and the sacred compact between host and guest had been restored to its rightful place at the center of civilized society. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new disruptions to the natural order that required correction. But tonight, the silver spoons rested in Fritz's kitchen, ready to serve their proper purpose, and Arthur Pembroke's memory lived on in the scholarships that bore his name and the integrity that guided their distribution. In Nero Wolfe's world, that represented the proper resolution of any case, not merely the punishment of evil, but the restoration of good to its rightful place in the order of things. Some traditions, like justice carefully pursued and hospitality honestly offered, were worth preserving exactly as they should be. The weight of silver, properly balanced, could indeed carry the world, one meal at a time, one act of trust at a time, one commitment to integrity at a time. As I turned off the last lamp, I reflected that some folks just don't understand that if you're going to pervert the tools of hospitality into weapons of murder, you're going to end up stirring up a whole lot more trouble than you bargained for. The brownstone exhaled into silence, its sanctuary restored, its purpose reaffirmed. The murder was solved, the spoon was cleansed, and all was right with our particular corner of the world. That, in the end, was enough.